Hi, I'm Matt Smith with the Portland chapter of the American Guild of Organists, and we're really excited that Capella Romana is going to be leading a service at our West Region Convention here in Portland, Oregon, July 10th through 13th. Thanks so much for being with us today. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself? And especially, I'd be really interested if you could share some thoughts on your personal journey with Byzantine chant.
Sure. Thanks for having me today. It's a real honor to come speak with you. My name is Photini, Downie Robinson, as Matt mentioned. I have been a professional musician for over 30 years. I've got my degree in vocal performance from DePauw University in Indiana, and I have a certificate in Byzantine music from Hellenic College, Holy Cross. I am the protopsaltria, which means head chanter at Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Cathedral in Northeast Portland. I'm the founding director of Ethos Studio, which is it started as a voice studio specifically designed for chanters and for clergy, but it's really kind of developed into more of a space for learning Byzantine chant specifically. So I've been doing that since 2019. And I'm also a graduate student at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox Seminary in Boston. I'm working remotely in their Master of Theological Studies program. Um, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about Capella Romana, and I want to kind of jump ahead because that is very influential in my journey with Orthodoxy and Byzantine chant in particular.
Yeah, you've been a longtime member of Capella Romana.
Yeah, yeah. So Capella Romana was founded in 1991, so 32 years ago, and I was just doing some calculations and realizing that I've been a member of the group for exactly half of that. I've been with Capella for 16 years now, which is amazing. The time just flies. Capella was founded by our music director, Dr. Alexander Lingus, who is still at the helm. Um, I've also served a couple of terms on Capella's board of directors. So I began with Capella in 2007. I did my first project with them, and I came on board as one of just the local pool of professional musicians who could come in and do projects. So we were doing music like Rachmaninoff and the kind of music that anybody who has traditional classical music training as a choral singer can come in and read and do without any specific kind of training other than a music degree. And so my first few years with Capella, I was just doing those kinds of projects. At that point in my life, I'd never even heard of Orthodox Christianity. I was raised Protestant, Presbyterian actually. I'd never heard Byzantine chant before. It was just this entirely new soundscape to my Western ears. And at that time, it was really just the men, sort of a subset of the Capella men who were Orthodox, most of whom were Greek, who already had some training in this music. And so that was sort of a group within a group that did that sort of music. But it's hard to hang around Capella Romana for any length of time without hearing it. And I just became so curious about it. It was this feeling as though I had somehow heard this before, even though I hadn't. It was, sometimes you get that feeling that something was with you a long time ago or in some way that it's hard to even identify. But I just felt this real connection with it. And gradually I started to do some of the Greek projects with Capella. Once again, they were more Western style, but they were still in Greek, so I started to learn how to sing in Greek. And through this process, I started to become a little bit familiar with the church at large. So apart from the music, but just what is this faith tradition that is so beautiful that I'd never even heard of, right? So concurrently to my musical journey, I started investigating the Orthodox faith tradition and learning more about what that was. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to know. And then, not too long after that, this was in early 2015, John Michael Boyer, who is the assistant director of Capella Romana, he started a class for any cappella singers who wanted to learn Byzantine notation. And we'll talk more about this later, but a lot of people don't realize that Byzantine chant has its own notational system that is developed specifically for this kind of music. There's a lot that has happened between then and now, 8 years later. But one of those things that happened that is significant is last October in 2022, I was formally tonsured into the office of cantor by my bishop. So that
Congratulations.
thank you. That's a really big deal.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Byzantine notation that you mentioned, and you had sent me a couple of samples before we got on the call to illustrate a Biz Byzantine notation and
Mhm.
then how it's transcribed into Western notation. I was wondering if you could describe the Byzantine notation a little bit, and and how it is interpreted, and
Yeah.
yeah.
So the biggest difference between Byzantine notation and staff notation is that Byzantine notation is all relative to where you start. So, for example, if you're going to write something in staff notation, you have to make some decisions about what key you're going to put it in, where you're actually going to lay that out on the staff. So, with that said, Byzantine notation, all of the what we call neumes, which is probably a term familiar to many listeners from maybe Gregorian chant or other kinds of medieval music. Um, they give you instructions in terms of where you go in the scale relative to where you are. So, for instance, there's a neume that we call an ison, which means stay on the same note. Or there are a number of neumes that say go up one, or go down one, or go up a third, or go up a fourth, right? So that's what the neumes are telling you. They're all directional. So are you going up? Are you going down? Are you staying the same? And how far are you going up, or are you going down? And then, of course, there are other sorts of annotations on the neumes that tell you, we're gonna cut this note in half duration wise, or we're gonna extend it. So the same way that you would put a dot on a quarter note or a half note, we have those kinds of annotations as well. The other thing that's important about Byzantine notation is that there are implied ornaments. So Byzantine style has very ornate ornamentation, and all of that ornamentation is not written explicitly into the music. A lot of it is implied by how you put certain patterns of neumes together. Um, and it's interesting. I'm also a graduate student in theology, and we talk a lot about translation, literally translating a text from Greek or from Hebrew, and how there's no such thing as translation without some degree of interpretation. If you're going to translate something into a different language, you have to make some decisions about what you think that means, right?
Hmm.
And it's the same when you're transcribing. If I'm transcribing something from Byzantine notation to Western notation, I have to make decisions about how certain figures are going to be ornamented in order to actually write those patterns into the staff notation. And it gets a little bit tricky because staff notation doesn't have any way of representing um, what are structural notes, what are ornamental notes. Because understanding that structure is going to inform the emphasis you put on certain notes and not just making them
Hmm.
all sound the same. And also, not to mention, there are differences in tuning. Uh, so we don't use Byzantine music doesn't use the exact same scales as we use in Western music. We have a lot of what you would probably call micro tuning, which is what makes the various modes sound the way they do. And when you're making a representation in staff notation, especially with certain modes, it's really hard to notate those pitches exactly where they're supposed to live, sometimes kind of in the cracks of the piano, right? It's like between a flat or a natural.
One more just on this topic before we move on. When you say there are implied ornamentations, that makes me think that there must be a strong oral tradition in how the training is transmitted from, experienced to less experienced chanters. Am I reading that right? Or is that something you could comment on?
Absolutely. I think that's a really, really important point in that this is an oral tradition. And even today in 2023, you can tell who somebody's teacher is just by listening to them chant. And for instance, my teacher is John Michael Boyer, and I've had a number of people comment that when they listen to me chant, they can tell that I'm his student because I've picked up a lot of what he does. Because I had the immense privilege of being his assistant chanter for a number of years before I became the main chanter. And so that's still true today, even though you can get written music for most everything. Um, it's not the kind of thing where you can just, without training, pick up a piece of music and execute it. You have to know how to read between the lines. And there are different schools of thought. Just as, if you go into a village in Greece, every grandmother is going to have her own recipe for the traditional dishes of the region. And she's going to tell you that that's the only one that's right. It's kind of the same thing where depending on who your teacher is, they learned from their teacher who learned from their teacher. And even today, there's still this very consistent line between schools in terms of how people were taught. So just a tiny example. So in the music that I sent you, which is the Lord I Have Cried in first mode. This is a text that is sung at every single Vespers service near the beginning. First mode is something akin to a minor scale in Western music. I could keep you here all day with how it's not exactly that, but I know that's not the focus of this interview. But if I were to just read the neumes without any sort of ornamentation, if I can even do it, just the first line would sound something like this. Lord, I have cried to you, hear me. Sweet. But no experienced cantor would ever sing it like that. One would know to do it something more like this. Lord, I have cried to you, hear me. Right?
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Let's shift over to the convention, the West Region Convention of the AGO, July 10th through 13th here in Portland, Oregon. Capella Romana is going to lead a service of choral worship at the Grotto, which is a Roman Catholic shrine in Northeast Portland with a beautiful chapel and grounds. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what we can expect to hear during the service at the Grotto. And
Yeah.
congratulations, you'll be making your directorial debut during
Thank
that
you. It's
service
very
with Capella.
exciting.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I'm very excited about this. What you can expect is that this is going to be an actual Vespers service. This is not a recreation or some sort of concert that's based on a liturgical service. This will actually be a liturgical service that we might actually do at the cathedral at Holy Trinity. So this is probably familiar for Western churchgoers as well, but for those who aren't familiar, Vespers is the service that begins the next liturgical day. So for any particular liturgical day, when we refer to the office of that service, that's generally speaking of the Vespers service, which is the night before. And then what we call orthros, many people know as matins. Those terms are more or less interchangeable. and then the Eucharistic service, so the Mass, if you will, the what we call the Divine Liturgy, which is where we receive communion. So those three services make up the office for a particular commemoration. So since this is going to be held on July 12th, what we are actually doing is the Vespers service for July 13th. And so on July 13th, we have a couple of different commemorations in the Greek Orthodox Church. Though these might be different for, say, the Orthodox Church of America or the Russian Church. Each jurisdiction, I mean, there are many commemorations that are shared by all of us, but some of us have our own as well. So we in the Greek Orthodox Church are celebrating the Archangel Gabriel. And we are also celebrating Saint Stephen the hymnographer, who was a first century saint and was also the nephew of Saint John of Damascus, who is one of our most important Byzantine hymnographers also. So some exciting commemorations there.
Can you tell us a little bit about the repertoire that will be part of the service?
Yeah. So Orthodox services are, all of the hymnography is prescribed. So unlike some other traditions where you get to say, okay, I think we're going to do this hymn and that hymn because those topics seem to match the sermon, it doesn't really work like that for us. We have a number of service books and cycles that overlap in interesting ways, and those cycles and the texts that are associated with those cycles determine what any particular service looks like and what hymnography is going to be included. So with that said, most of the hymnography that you will hear will be either for the Archangel Gabriel or for Saint Stephen the hymnographer.
Well, I know the attendees of the convention are really going to enjoy the service. It sounds gorgeous. Those of us who are in the Pacific Northwest probably already have some familiarity with Capella Romana. For those who are coming from other areas where maybe haven't had the opportunity to hear Capella Romana live, I know it's going to be a very special experience. So I wanted to thank you very much for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us today to just give us some background about what we can expect. And if you're watching and you have not registered for the convention yet, please do so. It's going to be a great convention. We have a lot of exquisite programming planned in addition to Capella Romana. And you can go to agowest2023.com to register. You don't have to be an AGO member. And we're going to look forward to seeing everyone there July 10th through the 13th, and specifically at the Grotto for Capella Romana's choral worship service.
Thank you, Matt. Pleasure to be here.